Hello, everyone. Welcome to my first video. My name is Zach Alicio. I'm a mental health professional. Currently, I work as an outpatient therapist in Pennsylvania. I also train family-based therapists, conduct clinical supervision, and serve on the board for marriage family therapists, or MFTs. In today's video, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty important. We're going to take a look at structural family therapy, or SFT. And please know, this video is not intended to be a comprehensive didactic on structural family therapy. It's just a brief overview of the important tenets and how they may or may not be helpful. So we're going to look at structural family therapy in 4 parts. First, we're going to take a look at the history of SFT. Then we're going to take a look at key components, treatment, and then maybe some criticisms that structural family therapy has faced, especially in its origin. So first, without further ado, let's take a look at the history. So structural family therapy is a systemic model created by a gentleman by the name of Salvador Minuchin in the early 1960s. Sal Minuchin really wanted to design a therapy approach that parted from the traditional intrapsychic models and really illustrated the impact of the oppression on family suffering from poverty and specifically to correct delinquent behaviors. From the early 1960s all the way to the 1970s, the model gained traction, and Sal employed his model at CHOP, which is the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, to work with children exhibiting symptoms related to anorexia nervosa. This model believes that symptoms are linked to a deterioration in family structure. That is the word that I'm going to use throughout the rest of this video, and it's the most important thing about structural family therapy: family structure. I know when I first learned about this model, I was like, family structure, what does that even mean? I hear you. We're going to talk about it. One of the benefits of a structural family therapy theory is that distress can originate or be maintained by the relationships within the system, which is common really among several series. In the 1980s, structural family therapy was heavily criticized by feminists and social constructivists who really accused the model of not being sensitive to cultural issues such as gender and power dynamics or multicultural issues. Major works, write this down, and I'll also link this in the comment section. But major works by structural family therapy include Families of the Slums, and I think that was 1967, and Families in Family Therapy, which was in the mid-70s, Psychosomatic Families in the late 70s, and Family Therapy Techniques in 1991. These publications really trace the history of structural family therapy and its evolution or its origin until today. And there's some other major works in there like Family Kaleidoscope and some other works there as well. So kind of as we transition from the history to the key components, I think the most fundamental question is, what is structural family therapy? What are those key tenets? Glad you asked. The basic premise of structural family therapy is that symptomology and distress is best understood in terms of relationships and systems rather than, again, intrapsychic challenges, problematic personalities, or just plain bad behavior. Now, you have to remember, Sal, in the beginning of his career, he was really thinking about not only oppression, but identifying and correcting juvenile delinquent behavior. So he was, quote unquote, working with a lot of plain bad behavior. In other words, behavior is just not the result of an individual's thinking. This theory really showcases the human behavior is not best understood inside a vacuum, rather in relation to one another. Makes sense, right? The interactions that happen within your family or my family shape the behaviors, the thinking patterns, and feelings that you and I see, that you and I feel. So that's kind of just a general basic understanding of structural family therapy. Let's take a more zoomed in view and look at its parts. Really, out of this whole video, and if you're taking a course on structural family therapy or systems theories, and really, I think the most important thing that you have to remember with SFT is the structure of the family is the most important piece. Remember, we said we talked about structure a few minutes ago? Here we go. This can be really easy to understand, or it can be really confusing. People might say, well, what do you mean, again, by structure of the family? I'm going to tell you. Structure refers to the what, the how, the when, where, and who of the family. Think organization or an arrangement in a family, because that information will help inform a therapist on behavior patterns, relationship quality, hierarchy, rules, roles, ways of relating to one another, all those things. So think about structure as arrangement or how the family organizes itself. Probably one of the biggest key terms that you'll hear in structural family therapy and some other family therapy models as well is a subsystem. A subsystem is super easy to understand. It's really just a smaller system within a bigger system. So if we use a family, for example, right, we have a number of different folks in a family. If we think about the traditional nuclear family, you have a caregiver one, caregiver two, sometimes two parents. You might have a few kids. You have some grandparents up there. A subsystem could be the parental subsystem, right? Or it could be a sibling subsystem comprised maybe of two sisters or a brother and a sister, two brothers, four brothers, whatever it is. A spousal subsystem is another type of system. And you ask, well, why do these exist? Well, what their purpose is to carry out family tasks necessary for overall function of the family. So for example, I'm a part of a sibling subsystem. I'm also part of a spousal subsystem. I'm part of a child subsystem. I'm also part of a therapy subsystem. And each system is different. There are different rules and structure, what's okay, what's not okay in each one of these systems. The amount of power in one might be different than the amount of power in another. And systems can overlap. Like for example, I'm part of a child subsystem with my sister, who's also part of a sibling subsystem with me, but the rules inherent and that are practiced in the child subsystem might be different than the ones in the sibling subsystem. Same with parental and spousal subsystems. Boundaries. I said I lied. This might be the biggest key term from structural family therapy. Boundaries really are an invisible set of rules that regulate the way members interact with one another. They define the who and how. Boundaries vary in flexibility, permeability, and separateness. A potential problematic boundary may result if a child in the child subsystem has equal parental power as the parents in the parental subsystem. Or on the other hand, a rigid boundary that does not allow for parents to be close with their children. Rigid boundaries often block attachment, and diffuse boundaries may be confusing, chaotic, and don't allow for autonomy or privacy. Another key term, hierarchy. It's just a way in which the family is organized, regulating power within and between subsystems. Relational alignments, which really refers to a couple key terms. Two of them we're going to talk about is coalitions and triangulation. A coalition is an often unhelpful three-person relationship where two parties or individuals align against a third. For example, maybe your mother and you align against your sister or a sibling, creating conflict. The opposite version of a coalition is an alliance, which can be helpful. Triangulation, which can be similar to a coalition. Let's use an example. A child experiences demands from a parent or a caregiver that they must side with them or else, right? It's like that. I often see it a lot in my work. The child is feeling like pulled from both ends and their arms are getting stretched and stretched and stretched because one parent says you need to do this or else. That conditional love, not that unconditional love. Two parents maybe who are experiencing anxiety from one another. So one parent, what do? They ease their anxiety by recruiting alcohol or becoming obsessed with television. So there are some of the basic fundamentals of structural family therapy. And remember, this is just a quick walkthrough. You can read a book, take a course on structural family therapy that will go over this in depth and talk about a million things that we're not mentioning today, right now. But maybe we'll get into that in another video where we can look at some of the specific, more in-depth tenets of structural family therapy. Let's take a look at the role of a counselor, which is really important in terms of structural family therapy. The primary role of the therapist is to activate alternative and healthier family transactional patterns or reorganize family structure. Often the therapist takes a more active stance, takes more of an executive stance. This is based on the premise of a faulty or unhelpful pattern, or I'm sorry, a faulty or unhelpful structure. So the therapist must intervene to challenge the current way of thinking. And that in some ways has evolved over time too. But that's basically the role of the therapist. Assessment, one of my favorite parts of structural family therapy is assessment. Assessment is often conducted with the family through a variety of tools in the therapist's disposal. I love assessment. Tools like a genogram, which is basically a therapeutic family tree or a relational map. A structural map, which really illustrates power and hierarchy, family mapping, and a host of other options. An enactment can be a version of assessments. The most important piece about assessment is that structural family therapy focuses on, remember, family structure, like boundaries, functions, relationships, flexibility for change, rules, roles, which dictate interactions among the family. And how, not only do we have these tools at our disposal, but how does the therapist do that is we know what the what is, that's the assessment tools, but the how is through joining and accommodating, right? You've probably heard that word joining before. The therapist is joining with the family system to create a new system so that there becomes a new position of leadership, which in the beginning is the therapist. Now, let's move on to treatment. First stage is accommodation and joining, which we were just talking about. Accommodation or accommodating is basically adjusting to the family structure. Joining means concretely understanding and relating to the system as a whole and each individual and each subsystem. Regardless of the specific techniques you might employ, remember that the overarching principles behind SFT is that there is an unhelpful structure in place. So the goal is to reorganize family structure. The therapist will gain insight into problems by working directly with the family. This can be done through your own interactions with the family, conflicts, observations, again, family mapping or genogram, enactments. And here are some things that a structural family therapist might discover. Number one, boundaries are too rigid or too diffuse. Maybe a therapist discovers, number two, is that there's a lack of cohesiveness within the family, creating distrust in the sibling subsystem or any subsystem. Number three, that there's a developmental trauma or hardship that has sort of stunted the trust of outside systems. Four, triangulation, one parent and a child are connected due to a previous affair. This is not all that you might find, but these are just some general assumptions or general guesses that you might find when working with a family. What are some techniques that we employ as structural family therapists? Number one, enactments. Basically, they're redos of problematic family interactions. Think, or for example, witnessing that a parent engages in too much conflict in front of the children. A structural family therapist may assist the parent in relating in different ways through active intervention. Enactments can take the form of role plays and all kinds of exercises and that, again, redo the problem or redo the problematic transaction in a healthier, more functional way. Unbalancing. This is really to restore appropriate equilibrium to the family. This may take the form of therapists temporarily joining one subsystem and using their authority to change behavior or a thinking pattern. I may join a parental subsystem and have them practice healthier forms of the parental role. Restructuring and boundary making, the therapist teams up with the family to strengthen or dilute certain boundaries within the family. For instance, a mother and a son who are enmeshed, the mother suffocates the son's need for growth and autonomy. So the therapist might illustrate the need for role changes and strengthening or crafting a new boundary. That way the son can then have his needs met for developmentally appropriate discovery and autonomy, and the mother can feel secure in her own parental subsystem. Reframing, this is basically assisting individuals thinking about a problem in a different way. I love this technique. It's so helpful. I use it all the time, not only in structural family therapy, but in real life. It's awesome. You see this in CBT too, that cognitive reframing. All of us do this all the time. For example, helping a daughter see that although she didn't get the 95 or 100% that she wanted on her recent test, or helping a father see that he just didn't get across that finish line in that marathon that he was running in the exact time that he wanted. You can use that as fuel for more confidence and preparation for that next race or that next test. Finally, criticisms of structural family therapy. These are just a couple that I'm going to throw out there really quickly. And again, some of these evolved over time, and structural family therapy has been this ever evolving model that's tried to adapt with the changes. And I think for the most part, it's done a good job. One of the criticisms is there's too much focus on power between generations rather than within the same generation. We look at things like transactional patterns from grandparents or great grandparents, all the way to caregivers and the children. But what about within the same generations? Another one is a therapist assuming too much power and authority, being the change agent, really can contrast with folks that are really interested in those postmodern theories. And certain members of subgroups may be sided against, especially when there's one of those techniques that could be employed. That is a wrap. That's structural family therapy in a nutshell. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Until next time, I'll see you soon, and take it easy.